Back to phosgene gas, back to the Legionnaire's disease, back to the documents that I knew existed, and the documents that, if you try to pull them up on the Legacy Tobacco Documents Library, which is, by the way, for the people, I believe, who are students studying or people who I can't imagine. I can't imagine why. You can't sue them, the tobacco companies. You're not going to be able to find any information because you only get bits and pieces. But I do remember that you have a document, just not there. I can't find it, even though you date it properly, and it was certainly with you, and it was analyzed in my book, Intent to Deceive, which appears online, illegally napped by grasped or taken or purloined. I'm supposed to be a thief, these guys, they didn't do any of that sort of thing. But in getting back to what the final point about the NAGs, or the National Association of Attorney Generals, and their prioritized interest. There was one other thing that might have come out of the settlement, and actually it's a separate issue. And I had seen part of the trial. The trial was a RICO case against tobacco and big tobacco, or a certain group of tobaccos, and so that ended up as actually just civil naughtiness. That's the point of it. It was a civil RICO, so nobody ever went to the big house. Nobody went to jail for what they did or what they could have done. And I'm absolutely amazed at people that I know that appeared, and certainly are representative of what the tobacco industry was doing with the lawyers and the scientists and the universities and the medical profession and the medical schools. They were hiding, and this was subterfuge. And just a few names that come to bear. When we were worried about the ozone layer, one of the biggest players in the world came along, only he came from a statistical background, and then he turned out to be very expert in sick building syndrome, and so that was kind of a defense. So if you were looking for something that had to do with the effects of Freon 11, 12, and just 22, and it keeps on going, you could have a sick building, and that was a sick building. But to the people of Scotland, to Edinburgh, I really have to say that if you do have a chance to examine, for example, some of the documents that are actually referencing the chlorofluorocarbon in contact with the lit cigarette and so forth. There are some documents that appear on the Tobacco Legacy Library, and this one I'm looking at right now is talking about, of course, the stratosphere, and what are the effects of decomposition in our environment. Well, I mean, the British have a way, I suppose, of just tearing things up, and one of them was this particular idea. Although Dupont. Dupont was the theorist behind this, and their use of Freon. Every time you get a freeze-dried product, I'm sure, or peanuts or something like that, the packing peanuts or something like that, that there is a process that's got to be going on somewhere. There were plants all over the place, and these were enormous plants, and maybe that's a secret. I don't know. You can't find it. But Legionnaires' disease and phosgene gas was connected. it just sort of disappeared after a point, and it was part of a hearing in 1976-77, and it was certainly too radical. And as I say, it was a conspiracy. It was certainly conspiratorial in the reach that that the CDC came to after concluding that everybody should be either dismissed, fired, killed, or rushed off into some other little position. I remember communicating with while I was working for Wyatt Terencombs, and I remember communicating with a man who was most afraid of this, and he was the one who had a lot to do with exposing in terms of the people who were around him, and he was a lieutenant commander in the Navy, and he was on another project, and he happened to believe very seriously, and that's what I wrote about in Intent to Deceive. And I find other documents here now on the adverse effects of the G13 process, which, if you think about it, I mean, well, would you stop making a cigarette that you'd made before, an expanded tobacco product? And would you stop the use of the same kind of freeze-dried tobacco effect? I mean, I don't think so, but that's something that you can go to, and one of the real pleasures of knowing that you want something is the fact that Legacy Tobacco Documents Library has some information, and that's what I'm talking about. Gee, I mean, if you're going to win something, let's don't consider this in perpetuity, the concept of states winning a little bit of money because they're going to spend on roads and highways and whatever, or advertising. Yeah, come on. Advertising, the least important thing I mean, they're going to still put advertising in wherever they want to. One of the interesting things about this comes up in my meeting with Dick Scruggs and a guy by the name of Bozeman, and the luncheons we had when I first met them at the La Font Inn buffet, and they didn't know anything. They had no idea what was advertising and what was press media, and what a target market was. Nothing. It was just not there. And a fascinating thing to me is you have this, and I want to know, there were plants all over the place, large plants, and to expel this evidence into the stratosphere is still interesting. I don't know whether you can actually get to this, because you sort of dismiss the big tobacco companies. You dismiss the producers of this kind of thing, but you have to believe that if they made the product out of the G13 expansion, which was to freeze dry, to use the freeze dried technique, and this is, I'm looking at a document right now that I pulled from thank you, Legacy Tobacco Documents, which is talking about Legionnaires Disease and evolving Legionnaires Disease. Of course, the reality is there was an amount of value assessed at that time, and if you had to look at it, there were two parts to the vulnerability of exposing this kind of science to anybody, and the obvious point was, there was product disparagement, because this was the introduction period of Merit cigarettes, and Merit cigarettes, by the way, is still around, but is it still made the same way? I mean, well, I don't know. We have an FDA, and FDA now has the right to go in and take a peek and say, what are you doing? And the interesting thing is the FDA was involved with tobacco before, and it was just a terrible experience because the keys were hidden. But to find out formulas, to find out how, and to know something about, you're going to lose a lot. You just, you 14 years of this, 13 years, 14 years of this, and you're not even paying any attention. You have this dramatization of some people who are hired to be spear carriers, and by Project Truth, which is also Project Truth and Brown and Williamson, years earlier, and this is supposed to be create an adverse effect on a group of people. How many people are there in the world? I mean, we're not really tapping into anything when you take this tobacco settlement, which I have just gone over, and the whole concept is that the NAGS, the National Association of Attorneys General, sits around and they have the control of this, and it's all sealed. Well, you also know that the lawyers who got paid, not to be disrespectful, they worked hard to negotiate with the Senate in the first time, and that was not exactly anything other than the second time around, you finally got a shameful product or byproduct of the first, the same thing basically. Now, again, to the people of Scotland, this information is available, and if you want to look into it, if your government is not too far, as I understand, Scotland is different from England, so I know that somehow BAT has gotten away with a couple of things that have been going on for a long time. And you may not want to travel down to Guildford to read theirs, which came out of the Minnesota trial, which is the only trial that I know of, and during the Master Settlement Agreement trial period. You can also assume that Tad or Toddy or whatever his name was, who was head of British Petroleum, has no real spirit of conditioned remorse in his analysis of what this spill on the Gulf Coast was about. And so, it's a big ocean. Hey, it's a big ocean, and we really do have a terrible time not associating the same things with expanded tobacco and the fact that it might have something to do with your Legionnaires disease. Certainly, as a byproduct of these great enormous plants that are out there. Obviously, they're still out there. Well, maybe they're not. Ask somebody at BAT or at Philip Morris. Call David Bernick up and see if he would like to give you some information. He's a good lawyer, and he's probably going to be honest with you. He's not going to talk to you, but nevertheless, I think that if it's still going on, then you have a library, which is a very good one, and it's part of the only good thing, I suppose, that came out of the tobacco settlement. But nevertheless, I'm just getting into this. I hope for my children's children's children and everyone else that 50, 100 years from now, 200 years from now, we're not going to be doing the same thing to not only to the planet, but to the little areas of the planet, which may be bigger areas, meaning, for example, Scotland, Edinburgh. And so that's what I have in addition to the NAGS and the Master Settlement Agreement. A little final note on Legionnaires Disease. You can find some of this information, and even if you have to return to documents like my own Intent to Deceive, which happens to be planted on the net, you can find it. And so for that matter, I've reached my point